Chapter 3 of Cocoa and Chocolate. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Allison Hester of Athens, Georgia. Cocoa and Chocolate: Their History from Plantation to Consumer by Arthur W. Knapp. Chapter 3: Harvesting and Preparation for the Market. Gathering and Heaping. In the last chapter I gave a brief account of the cultivation of cacao. I did not deal with forking, spraying, cutlassing, weeding, and so forth, as it would lead us too far into purely technical discussions. I propose we assume that the planter has managed his estate well, and that the plantation is before us looking very healthy and full of fruit waiting to be picked. The question arises, how shall we gather it? Shall we shake the tree? Cacao pods do not fall off the tree, even when overripe. Shall we knock off or pluck the pods? To do so would make a scar on the trunk of the tree, and these wounds are dangerous in tropical climates, as they are often attacked by canker. A sharp machete or cutlass is used to cut off the pods which grow on the lower part of the trunk. As the tree is not often strong enough to bear a man, climbing is out of the question, and a knife on a pole is used for cutting off the pods on the upper branches. Various shaped knives are used by different planters. A common and efficient kind resembles a hand of steel, with the thumb as a hook, so that the pod stalk can be cut either by a push or pull. A good deal of ingenuity has been expended in devising a fool-proof picker, which shall render easy the cutting of the pod stalk, and yet not cut or damage the bark of the tree. A good example is the Agostini picker, which was approved by Hart. The gathering of the fruits of one's labor is a pleasant task, which occurs generally only at rare intervals. Cacao is gathered the whole year round. There is, however, in most districts, one principal harvest period, and a subsidiary harvest. With cacao in the tropics, as with corn in England, the gathering of the harvest is a delight to lovers of the beautiful. It is a great charm of the cacao plantation that the trees are so closely planted that nowhere does the sunlight find between the foliage a space larger than a man's hand. After the universal glare outside, it seems dark under the cacao, although the ground is bright with dappled sunshine. You hear a noise of talking, of rustling leaves, and falling pods. You come upon a band of coolies or negroes. One near you carries a long bamboo, as long as a fishing rod, with a knife at the end. With a lithe movement he inserts it between the boughs, and, by giving it a sharp jerk, nearly cuts the stalk of a pod, which falls from the tree to the ground. Only the ripe pods must be picked. To do this, not only must the picker's aim be true, but he must also have a good eye for color. Whether the pods be red or green, as soon as the color begins to be tinted with yellow, it is ripe for picking. This change occurs first along the furrows in the pod. Fewer unripe pods would be gathered if only one kind of pod were grown on one plantation. The confusion of kinds and colors which is often found makes sound judgment very difficult. That the men generally judge correctly the ripeness of pods high in the trees is something to wonder at. The pickers pass on, strewing the earth with ripe pods. They are followed by the graceful, dark-skinned girls, who gather one by one the fallen pods from the greenery until their baskets are full. Sometimes a basketful is too heavy, and the girl cannot comfortably lift it onto her head, but when one of the men has helped her to place it there, she carries it lightly enough. She trips through the trees, her bracelets jingling, and tumbles the pods onto the heap. Once one has seen a great heap of cacao pods, it glows in one's memory. Anything more rich, more daring in the way of color one's eye is unlikely to light on. The artist, seeing only an aesthetic effect, would be content with this for the consummation, and would wish the pods to remain unbroken. Breaking and extracting. There are planters who believe that the product is improved by leaving the gathered pods several days before breaking, and they would follow the practice but for the risk of losses by theft. Hence, the pods are generally broken on the same day as they are gathered. The primitive methods of breaking with a club or by banging on a hard surface are happily little used. Masson of New York made pod breaking machines, and Sir George Watt has recently invented an ingenious machine for squeezing the beans out of the pod, but at present the extraction is done almost universally by hand, either by men or women. A knife which would cut the husk of the pod, and was so constructed that it could not injure the beans within, would be a useful invention. The human extractor has the advantage that he or she can distinguish the diseased, unripe, or germinated beans and separate them from the good ones. Picture the men sitting round the heap of pods, and farther out, in a larger circle, twice as many girls with baskets. The man breaks the pod, and the girls extract the beans. The man takes the pod in his left hand and gives it a sharp slash with a small cutlass, just cutting through the tough shell of the pod, but not into the beans inside, and then gives the blade, which he has embedded in the shell, a twisting jerk, so that the pod breaks in two with a crisp crack. The girls take the broken pods and scoop out the snow-like beans with a flat wooden spoon or a piece of rib bone, the beans being pulled off the stringy core, or placenta, which holds them together. The beans are put preferably into baskets, or, failing these, onto broad banana leaves, which are used as trays. Practice renders these processes cheerful and easy work, often performed to an accompaniment of laughing and chattering. Fermenting. I allow myself the pleasure of thinking that I am causing some of my readers a little surprise when I tell them that cacao is fermented, and that the fermentation produces alcohol. As I mentioned above, the cacao bean is covered with a fruity pulp. The bean, as it comes from the pod, is moist, whilst the pulp is full of juice. It would be impossible to convey it to Europe in this condition. It would decompose, and when it reached its destination would be worthless. In order that a product can be handled commercially, it is desired to have in it such a condition that it does not change, and thus with cacao it becomes necessary to get rid of the pulp, and whilst this may be done by washing or simply by drying, experience has shown that the finest and driest product is obtained when the drying is preceded by fermentation. Just as broken grapes will ferment, so will the fruity pulp of the cacao bean. Present-day fermentaries are simply convenient places for storing the cacao whilst the process goes on. In the process of fermentation, Dr. Chittenden says the beans are "stewed in their own juice." This may be expressed less picturesquely but more accurately by saying the beans are warmed by the heat of their own fermenting pulp, from which they absorb liquid. In Trinidad, the cacao which the girls have scooped out into the baskets is emptied into larger baskets, two of which are crooked on a mule's back, and carried thus to the fermentary. In Surinam it is conveyed by boat, and in San Thomé by trucks, which run on Decauville railways. The period of fermentation and the receptacle to hold the cacao vary from country to country. With cacao of the Criollo type, only 1 or 2 days fermentation is required, and as a result, in Ecuador and Ceylon, the cacao is simply put in heaps on a suitable floor. In Trinidad and the majority of other cacao-producing areas where the Forastero variety predominates, from 5 to 9 days are required. The cacao is put into the sweat boxes and covered with banana or plantain leaves to keep in the heat. The boxes may measure 4 feet each way and be made of sweet-smelling cedar wood. As is usual with fermentation, the temperature begins to rise, and if you thrust your hands into the fermenting beans, you will find they are as hot and mucilaginous as a poultice. The temperature is the simplest guide to the amount of fermentation taking place.